Sarah Martinez moved the white cloth across the table for the third time. Her hands were red and rough from washing dishes and cleaning tables all day. She had been working at the Grand Meridian Hotel for 3 years now. Every day felt the same. Wake up at 5 in the morning, take the bus to work, clean tables, serve food, smile at customers who never looked at her face, go home late at night, sleep for a few hours, do it all again. The restaurant where she worked was very fancy. Rich people came here to eat expensive food and drink wine that cost more than Sarah made in a week. The walls were covered with beautiful paintings. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. The floor was made of white marble that reflected everything like a mirror. Even the chairs were covered in soft leather that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Sarah was 28 years old, but she felt much older. Her back hurt from bending over tables all day. Her feet were sore from standing for 12 hours straight. Sometimes she worked 2 jobs in one day. First at the hotel restaurant, then at a small diner across town. She needed every dollar she could get. Her mother was sick. Very sick. The doctor said she needed expensive medicine to get better. The medicine cost $800 every month. Sarah's father had died in a car accident 5 years ago. He had been the one who made good money. After he died, everything changed. The family had no savings. They had no insurance that would pay for everything. Sarah also had a younger brother, named Miguel. He was 22 and very smart. He was studying to be a doctor at the state university. His dream was to help people like their mother. But college was expensive too. Even with a scholarship, Miguel needed money for books, food, and a place to live. Sarah sent him $300 every month so he could stay in school. This meant Sarah lived on very little money. She shared a small apartment with 2 other women. Her room was tiny. She could touch both walls if she stretched out her arms. She had one window that looked out at a brick wall. She owned 3 work uniforms, 2 pairs of shoes, and some old clothes. She ate rice and beans most days because they were cheap. But Sarah had a secret. Something that made her different from the other waitresses. Something that made her feel alive when everything else felt gray and hopeless. She could play the piano. Not just simple songs. She could play beautiful, complicated music that made people cry. She had learned when she was 5 years old. Her father had saved money for 2 years to buy her a small used piano. It was old and some keys stuck, but Sarah loved it. She practiced every day after school. She was so good that her music teacher said she had a special gift. When Sarah was 18, she got a scholarship to study music at a good college. She was going to become a professional piano player. She was going to play in concert halls and make people happy with her music. Then her father died. Everything stopped. The scholarship only paid for half of college. Sarah could not afford the rest. She had to choose between her dreams and her family. She chose her family. She sold the old piano to help pay for her father's funeral. She never went to college. She never played piano again. Sometimes late at night, Sarah would dream about playing piano. In her dreams, she wore a beautiful black dress and played for hundreds of people. Everyone listened with tears in their eyes. When she woke up, she felt empty. Those dreams seemed like they belonged to someone else. Someone who had money and time and choices. Tonight was different from other nights. The hotel was having a big party. Rich people paid $500 each to come to this party. They called it a charity dinner. The money was supposed to help sick children at the local hospital. Sarah thought it was good to help sick children, but she also noticed that the rich people seemed to care more about being seen at the party than about the children. The party was in the hotel's biggest room. It was called the Grand Ballroom. Sarah had cleaned this room many times, but tonight it looked magical. Round tables covered with white cloth filled the space. Each table had fresh flowers and candles. The crystal lights were turned up bright. Everything sparkled like diamonds. The most beautiful thing in the room was the piano. It sat in one corner like a sleeping giant. It was black and shiny. Sarah knew it was a very expensive piano. A Steinway Grand. She had read about pianos like this in magazines when she was young. This piano probably cost more than most people made in 5 years. Sarah tried not to look at the piano too much. It made her chest feel tight with sadness. She focused on her work instead. She arranged forks and knives next to the plates. She folded napkins into perfect shapes. She filled water glasses. She checked that everything was perfect for the rich people who would come soon. Other waitresses and waiters rushed around the room. Everyone was nervous. The hotel manager, Mr. Thompson, walked around checking everything twice. He was a thin man with gray hair who always looked worried. He told everyone to smile more and work faster. He reminded them that these were very important people coming tonight. He said they must not make any mistakes. Sarah nodded and kept working. She was used to being invisible. Rich people looked through her like she was made of glass. They talked about their expensive vacations and their big houses while she stood right next to them. They complained about their easy problems while she cleaned up their messes. They never asked her name or how she was doing. To them, she was just part of the furniture. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the lights made everything glow. Maybe it was the beautiful flowers that smelled like spring. Maybe it was the piano sitting there like it was waiting for something. Sarah could not shake the feeling that this night would be special somehow. She finished setting up her section of tables and took a short break. She walked to the kitchen to get a drink of water. Through the window, she could see expensive cars pulling up to the hotel. The rich people were starting to arrive. Soon the room would be full of laughter and conversation. Soon she would be running around serving food and wine. Sarah took a deep breath and straightened her black uniform. She checked her appearance in the reflection of a metal door. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. Her face looked tired, but she forced herself to smile. She had learned to hide her real feelings at work. The sound of voices grew, louder as more people arrived. Sarah walked back to the ballroom. The night was about to begin. The first guests walked into the grand ballroom like they owned the world. Sarah watched from beside the kitchen door as men in expensive black suits and women in sparkling dresses filled the room. Their jewelry caught the light from the crystal chandeliers. Their shoes were so shiny they reflected the marble floor. Everything about them screamed money. Sarah recognized some faces from magazines and newspapers. There was Richard Hayes, who owned half the buildings downtown. He was talking loudly about buying a new yacht. Next to him stood Jennifer Walsh, who had inherited millions from her father's oil company. She was showing off a diamond necklace that probably cost more than Sarah would make in her entire life. The women's dresses looked like they came from movies, long and flowing, covered in beads and silk. Some had fur coats even though it was not that cold outside. The men wore watches that cost more than cars. They all smelled like expensive perfume and cologne. Their voices were loud and confident, like they never doubted they belonged everywhere they went. Sarah picked up a tray of champagne glasses and began walking through the crowd. The guests took the glasses without looking at her face. They were too busy talking to each other about important things. At least they thought their things were important. "Did you hear about the Williams family?" one woman said to another. "They bought a house in France, $15 million, right on the coast." "Oh, that's nothing," the other woman replied. "We're thinking about buying an island, a whole island. The children need somewhere quiet to vacation." Sarah kept walking. She heard conversations about private jets and art collections. She heard complaints about having to wait 3 months for a new car to be built. She heard someone say they were bored because they had already been to every country in Europe this year. At table number 5, a group of men were talking about business deals. One man, fat and red-faced, was bragging about firing 50 workers to save money. "They were just dead weight," he said, laughing. "Now I can afford that second house in Colorado." Sarah felt sick. 50 families lost their jobs so this man could have another house he probably would not use very often. She wondered if those 50 families had children. She wondered if they were eating rice and beans now, like she did. Near the piano, Sarah saw Margaret Whitmore. Everyone knew Margaret. She was in the newspaper all the time for giving money to charities. She was about 60 years old with silver hair and always wore pearls. People called her a saint for helping others, but Sarah noticed Margaret only talked to other rich people. She never spoke to the waiters or cleaning staff. Margaret was holding court like a queen. A circle of people stood around her, listening to every word. She was telling them about her latest charity project. "We're building a new wing at the art museum," she said. "It will have my family's name on it, of course. The Whitmore wing has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Everyone nodded and smiled. They told Margaret how wonderful she was, how generous, how kind. Margaret soaked up their praise like a flower drinking water. Sarah wondered if Margaret really cared about art or if she just wanted her name on a building. At another table, Sarah overheard a conversation that made her angry. A young man with perfect hair was complaining to his friends. "I'm so stressed," he said. "I can't decide which college to attend, Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. They all accepted me, but I don't know which one will look best when I take over Daddy's company." Sarah thought about her brother Miguel. He had worked so hard to get into State University. He had studied every night in high school. He had volunteered at hospitals and homeless shelters. He had written essay after essay applying for scholarships, and still he almost could not afford to go to college. This rich boy was stressed about having too many choices. Miguel was stressed about having no choices at all. Life was not fair. More guests kept arriving. The ballroom filled with the sound of expensive laughter and clinking champagne glasses. A waiter passed by carrying a plate of fancy food. Sarah saw tiny portions of caviar and lobster arranged like art. One plate probably cost more than Sarah spent on food in a month. The guests moved around the room like dancers in a ballet. They air-kissed each other without actually touching. They complimented dresses they probably hated. They talked about how much they cared about helping others while wearing jewelry that could feed a family for years. Sarah refilled water glasses at table 7. The people there were discussing their vacation homes. "The house in the Hamptons is getting old," one woman said. "I think we need to tear it down and build something new. Maybe something bigger." "You should," agreed her friend. "We just finished building our place in Aspen. 3 floors, 10 bedrooms. We'll probably only use it 2 weeks a year, but it's nice to have options." Sarah tried to imagine having so much money that you could build a house and barely use it. She tried to imagine having 10 bedrooms when you needed only 1. She tried to imagine thinking a perfectly good house was too old and needed to be destroyed. Near the piano, a group of men were talking about their children. But they were not talking about being proud of their kids or worried about their futures. They were talking about their children like investments. "My son is starting at the law firm next month," one man said. "I bought him a partnership, of course. Can't have him starting at the bottom like a common worker." "Smart," said another man. "I did the same for my daughter. She's running my company's marketing department now. Doesn't matter that she's never had a real job. Money opens all doors." Sarah thought about her brother again. Miguel was working 3 part-time jobs while going to school. He served food in the cafeteria, cleaned offices at night, and tutored other students on weekends. He earned every grade, every opportunity, every dollar. These rich children had everything handed to them on silver plates. The piano sat silent in the corner like a beautiful statue. Sarah noticed several people had put their drinks on top of it. They were using this expensive, wonderful instrument as a table. It made her heart hurt. That piano was meant to make music, not hold cocktail glasses. She walked over and carefully moved the glasses to a nearby table. She touched the piano's surface gently, like it was a sleeping animal. The wood was smooth and perfect. She could imagine the beautiful sounds hiding inside, waiting for someone to set them free. "Excuse me," said a sharp voice behind her. Sarah turned to see a thin woman with diamonds dripping from her ears. "I need more champagne. And make sure the glass is clean this time." Sarah nodded and smiled. "Of course, ma'am, right away." As she walked to get the champagne, Sarah heard the woman talking to her friend. "The service here is so slow. And did you see that girl touching the piano? The staff should know better than to put their hands on expensive things." Sarah's face burned with embarrassment. She wanted to tell the woman that she knew more about pianos than anyone in this room. She wanted to explain that she had treated the instrument with more respect in those few seconds than these people had all night. But she said nothing. She just got the champagne and brought it back with a smile. The evening continued like this. Rich people talking about their easy problems while Sarah and the other staff worked around them like invisible ghosts. The guests ate expensive food and drank wine that cost hundreds of dollars per bottle. They bid on auction items not because they wanted them, but because they wanted everyone to see how much money they could spend. Sarah noticed that for all their talk about helping sick children, most of the guests seemed more interested in impressing each other. They bid on auction items and then immediately started talking about tax deductions. They posed for pictures that would appear in the society pages of newspapers. As the night went on, Sarah felt more and more invisible. These people lived in a completely different world from hers, a world where money solved every problem and opened every door, a world where 30-year-old children could buy their way into any job, a world where houses were thrown away like old clothes and islands were purchased like toys. But in the corner, the piano waited patiently, silent and beautiful, and full of potential. Sarah found herself looking at it more and more as the night went on. She wondered what it would sound like. She wondered if anyone here even knew how to play it or if it was just another expensive decoration in their expensive lives. After 2 hours of serving champagne and clearing plates, Sarah finally got a 15-minute break. The rich guests had moved outside to the hotel's terrace for cocktails and cigars. They wanted to see the city lights and show off to each other, under the stars. The ballroom was empty except for the cleaning staff who were preparing for dinner service. Sarah sat down on a chair near the kitchen door. Her feet hurt badly. The cheap shoes she wore to work had thin soles that did nothing to cushion her steps on the hard marble floor. She rubbed her ankles and tried to relax for a few minutes before the dinner rush began. The ballroom looked different when it was empty. Quieter, more peaceful. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled overhead, but without the loud voices and laughter, Sarah could actually appreciate their beauty. The fresh flowers on each table smelled sweet and reminded her of her grandmother's garden when she was little. But it was the piano that drew her attention most. Without people crowding around it, she could see it clearly for the first time all evening. It was magnificent. The black surface reflected the chandelier lights like a dark mirror. The keys were perfect white and black rectangles, clean and waiting. The bench was made of the same dark wood as the piano, with a soft cushion covered in rich fabric. Sarah had not been this close to a real piano in years. Since she sold her father's old piano, she had only seen pictures in magazines or glimpsed instruments through music store windows. She never allowed herself to go inside those stores. It hurt too much to see what she could not have. But now, alone in this quiet room, she found herself standing up and walking toward the piano. Each step felt like walking toward a piece of her past, a piece of herself that she had buried deep inside to survive the daily struggle of her life. She stopped a few feet away from the instrument. Even from this distance, she could tell it was perfect. Every curve was smooth, every surface was polished. This was not some cheap piano from a garage sale. This was a masterpiece. A Steinway grand piano probably worth more than most people's houses. Sarah looked around the empty ballroom. The other staff members were busy in the kitchen or setting up for dinner. No one was watching her. No one would see if she just looked a little closer. She took another step forward. Then another. Soon she was standing right next to the piano bench. Her heart was beating fast, like she was doing something forbidden. In a way, she was. People like her were not supposed to touch things like this. She was supposed to clean around them, serve food near them, but never actually touch them. But her hands seemed to move on their own. Before she could stop herself, she reached out and gently touched one of the white keys. It felt smooth and cool under her fingertip. She pressed it down slowly, and a single, pure note filled the silent ballroom. The sound was perfect, rich and full and beautiful. It hung in the air for a moment before fading away. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. She had forgotten how beautiful a good piano could sound. Her father's old piano had been lovely in its own way, but this instrument was in a completely different class. She pressed another key, then another. Each note was crystal clear and perfectly tuned. The piano responded to her touch like it was alive. like it had been waiting for someone who understood music to finally play it. Sarah sat down on the bench before she could stop, herself. The cushion was soft and comfortable. The height was perfect. The piano keys were at exactly the right level for her hands. It was like the instrument had been made just for her. She placed both hands on the keys but did not press down. Yet, she just felt the smooth surface under her palms. Memories came flooding back. Memories of being 5 years old and standing on a wooden box to reach her father's piano. Memories of her first piano teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been so patient and kind. Memories of practicing scales for hours until her fingers moved without thinking. She remembered her high school piano recitals. The nervous excitement before performing. The feeling of the music flowing through her fingers and into the air. The applause afterward. The proud smile on her father's face. The dreams of someday playing in concert halls and making people happy with her music. Sarah looked down at her hands. They were not the same hands that had played piano all those years ago. These hands were rough from washing dishes and cleaning tables. They were red and cracked from harsh cleaning chemicals. They had calluses from carrying heavy trays and moving furniture. These were working hands now, not musician hands. But as she flexed her fingers over the keys, muscle memory began to return. Her hands seemed to remember where each note lived. Her fingers curved naturally into the proper position. It was like riding a bicycle, something you never really forget, even after years of not doing it. She pressed down a simple C major scale. Her fingers moved from key to key, playing the pattern she had practiced thousands of times as a child. The notes were clean and even. Her technique was rusty, but the basic skill was still there, buried under years of other responsibilities. Sarah felt a rush of excitement and sadness at the same time. Excitement because she could still play. Sadness because she had lost so many years of music. How much better could she have been by now if she had been able to continue her studies? How many beautiful pieces could she have learned? How many people could she have touched with her music? She played the scale again, this time with both hands. Then she tried a simple piece she remembered from her childhood. Fürelise, by Beethoven. Her fingers stumbled a few times, but the melody was still there in her memory. The notes flowed like water, filling the empty ballroom with beauty. As she played, Sarah felt something awakening inside her, something that had been sleeping for years. It was like finding a part of herself that she had thought was gone forever. The music connected her to who she used to be, who she had always been deep inside, under all the work uniforms and tired smiles. She played another piece, then another. Each song brought back more memories, more feelings, more of the person she had been before life forced her to become someone else. Her fingers were getting stronger and more confident with each note. The piano responded beautifully to her touch. When she played softly, the notes were gentle and sweet. When she played with more force, the sound was powerful and rich. This instrument could do anything. It could whisper or sing or cry or laugh. It was like having a conversation with an old friend. Sarah lost track of time. She forgot about her sore feet and her tired back. She forgot about the rich people outside, on the terrace. She forgot about the dinner service that would start soon. She forgot about everything except the music flowing from her fingers. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. This was who she really was. Not a waitress. Not someone who cleaned up other people's messes. She was a musician. She was an artist. She was someone who could create beauty in the world. But even as she played, a voice in the back of her mind reminded her that this was not her life anymore. This piano did not belong to her. This music was just a stolen moment. Soon, she would have to go back to serving food and smiling at people who did not see her as a real person. She played one more scale, slowly and carefully, trying to memorize the feeling of the keys under her fingers. Then she stopped and sat quietly for a moment, her hands resting in her lap. The silence after the music felt heavy and sad. Sarah knew she should get up and go back to work. But for just a few more seconds, She wanted to stay connected to this piece of herself. She wanted to remember what it felt like to be a musician, instead of just someone who served musicians and other important people. The piano bench was comfortable. The instrument was beautiful. And for this brief moment, Sarah Martinez was exactly who she was meant to be. Sarah was still sitting at the piano when she heard footsteps behind her. Her heart jumped into her throat. She had been so lost in the music and her memories that she had not heard anyone come back into the ballroom. Panic shot through her body, like electricity. She was going to be in trouble. Big trouble. She quickly pulled her hands away from the keys and started to stand up. Her mind raced with excuses. She could say she was cleaning the piano. She could say she was moving something. She could say anything except the truth, that she had been playing because she missed music so much it hurt. "Please don't stop," said a gentle voice behind her. Sarah turned around, expecting to see Mr. Thompson, the hotel manager, with his angry face and sharp words. Instead, she saw a man she did not recognize. He was about 50 years old with kind eyes and graying hair. He wore an expensive suit like the other guests, but something about him seemed different, calmer, less showy. "I'm sorry, sir," Sarah said quickly. "I wasn't supposed to touch the piano. I was just... The man held up his hand to stop her from talking. "You don't need to apologize. I heard you playing from the hallway. It was beautiful." He walked closer, his eyes studying her face with genuine interest. "I'm Robert Chen." Sarah recognized the name. Robert Chen owned a big technology company downtown. She had seen his picture in the business section of the newspaper. He was one of the richest men in the city. She felt even more nervous. "I'm Sarah," she said quietly. "I work here. I serve food and clean tables. I shouldn't have been playing the piano. It won't happen again." Robert smiled. "Do you have formal training? You play like someone who studied music seriously." Sarah did not know how to answer. Part of her wanted to tell the truth. Part of her wanted to lie and say it was just a hobby. She was afraid that if she told him about her musical background, he might think she was trying to get attention or ask for something. "I used to study piano," she said carefully. "A long time ago." "How long ago?" Robert asked. He sat down on a chair near the piano, like he had all the time in the world to talk to her. Sarah looked toward the kitchen door. She needed to get back to work soon. The guests would be coming back inside for dinner, and she had tables to prepare. But there was something about Robert's voice that made her want to keep talking. "I stopped playing about 10 years ago," she said. "When my father died. I had to make other choices." Robert nodded like he understood. "Life has a way of taking us away from the things we love. I used to play violin when I was young. I wasn't very good, but I loved it. Then business took over everything." He looked at the piano. "My daughter used to play piano. She was very talented. She wanted to be a professional musician." "What happened?" Sarah asked before she could stop herself. "She became a lawyer instead," Robert said with a sad smile. "I convinced her it was more practical, more secure. I thought I was helping her make a smart choice." He was quiet for a moment. "Now she makes a lot of money, but she never smiles the way she used to when she played piano." Sarah felt a connection to this stranger. He understood something about losing music that other people might not understand. She found herself relaxing slightly. "Could you play something else?" Robert asked. "I promise you won't get in trouble. I know the hotel owner personally." Sarah looked at the piano keys. She wanted to play so badly it felt like a physical ache in her chest. But she was scared. What if other people came back and saw her? What if someone complained to Mr. Thompson? She needed this job. Her family needed her to keep this job. "I don't know," she said. "I really should get back to work." "Just one song," Robert said gently. For someone who misses hearing his daughter play, something in his voice made Sarah's heart hurt. She thought about her own father, who had been so proud of her music, who had saved money for 2 years to buy her that old piano, who had never missed one of her recitals, even when he was tired. from working 2 jobs. Sarah sat back down on the piano bench. Her hands were shaking slightly as she placed them on the keys. She closed her eyes and tried to think of the right piece to play. Something that would honor her father's memory. Something that would help this sad man remember his daughters. Music. She decided to play one of Chopin's nocturnes. It was a piece she had learned for a competition when she was 17. She had practiced it hundreds of times until it was perfect. It was the last piece she had performed in public before. Everything changed. Sarah began to play. The first notes were soft and gentle, like a lullaby. The melody was sad but beautiful, like remembering something precious that you had lost. Her fingers found their way across the keys like they were coming home after a long journey. As she played, Sarah felt the stress and tiredness of the day melting away. The sore feet and aching back disappeared. The worry about money and her mother's medicine faded into the background. There was only the music and the feeling of being completely herself again. The nocturne told a story without words. It spoke of longing and loss, but also of hope and beauty that could survive even the hardest times. Sarah put all of her feelings into the music, her love for her family, her sadness about her father, her dreams that had been put aside but never completely forgotten. When she finished playing, the ballroom was completely silent. Sarah opened her eyes and looked at Robert. There were tears running down his face. "That was extraordinary," he said, quietly. "You have a gift, a real gift." Sarah felt tears in her own eyes. It had been so long since anyone had said something like that to her, so long since anyone had seen her as more than just someone who served food and cleaned tables. "Thank you," she whispered. Robert stood up and walked closer to the piano. "Sarah, can I ask you something? Do you ever think about going back to music, taking lessons again, maybe performing?" Sarah shook her head. "I can't afford lessons, and I don't have time. I work 2 jobs to help my family. My mother is sick and my brother is in college and—" "What if there was a way?" Robert interrupted gently. "What if someone wanted to help you get back to music?" Sarah stared at him. "Why would you want to help me? You don't even know me." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Because I made a mistake. With my daughter. I convinced her to choose money over music. I can't fix that mistake, but maybe I can help someone else make a different choice." Before Sarah could respond, they heard voices in the hallway. The guests were coming back from the terrace. Dinner service was about to begin. Sarah jumped up from the piano bench. "I have to go. I have to get back to work." "Wait," Robert said. "This doesn't have to end here. I meant what I said about helping you." Sarah looked at him with confusion, and hope and fear all mixed together. This felt like a dream, like something that happened to other people, not to girls who worked as waitresses and ate rice and beans every night. "I don't understand," she said. "Trust me," Robert said. "Sometimes the most important moments in our lives come when we least expect them." The voices in the hallway were getting closer. Sarah could hear Mr. Thompson's voice giving instructions to the other staff members. She needed to go right now, before she got in trouble. But as she hurried toward the kitchen door, she carried Robert's words with her. "Trust me. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives come when we least expect them." Sarah had no idea that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. All because of a stolen moment at a piano and a stranger who understood the cost of giving up on dreams. The dinner service was in full swing when Robert found Sarah again. She was carrying a heavy tray of dirty plates back to the kitchen, moving quickly between the tables of laughing guests. Her face was flushed from hurrying around the hot ballroom, and small pieces of hair had escaped from her ponytail. "Sarah," Robert called softly as she passed near his table. She stopped and looked at him with surprise. During dinner service, guests almost never spoke directly to the waitstaff except to ask for more wine or complain about something. She walked over to his table, still holding the heavy tray. "Yes, sir? Do you need something?" Robert looked around. The ballroom. The dinner was almost over. Most guests had finished eating and were drinking coffee or more wine. Some were getting restless, checking their expensive watches and phones. The charity auction would not start for another 30 minutes. "I've been thinking about our conversation," Robert said quietly. About music and second chances. Sarah glanced nervously toward the kitchen. She needed to clear more tables before Mr. Thompson noticed she was taking too long. I really need to keep working, sir. What if I told you that everyone in this room needs to hear something real tonight? Robert asked. Something that reminds them why they're really here. Sarah did not understand what he meant. Sir? Robert stood up and gently took the tray from her hands. He set it on his table and looked directly into her eyes. These people came here tonight to help sick children. But look around. Do you see anyone talking about sick children? Or are they just talking about themselves? Sarah looked around the ballroom. Robert was right. At every table, she heard conversations about business deals, vacation homes, and expensive purchases. She had not heard anyone mention the children's hospital all evening, except during the brief speech before dinner. Play for them, Robert said, simply. What? Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. Play the piano. Now. For all of them. Robert's voice was gentle but certain. Show them what real beauty sounds like. Remind them why music matters, why art matters, why helping others matters. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. I can't do that. I'm not supposed to. Mr. Thompson would fire me. I can't lose this job. I told you I know the hotel owner, Robert said. You won't lose your job, I promise. But I'm not dressed right. I'm just wearing my work uniform and my hands are... Sarah looked down at her rough red hands. I'm not a performer anymore. I'm just a waitress. Robert smiled. The best music doesn't come from fancy clothes or perfect hands. It comes from the heart. And you have more heart than anyone in this room. Sarah looked at the piano across the ballroom. It sat silent and beautiful, waiting. She thought about her father, who had believed in her music so much. She thought about her brother Miguel, working so hard to become a doctor. She thought about all the dreams she had buried to survive. What would I play? She asked, her voice barely audible. Play something that tells your story, Robert said. Play something that reminds these people that there's more to life than money. Sarah's hands were shaking. This was crazy, impossible. She was a waitress, not a concert pianist. She had not performed for an audience in 10 years. Her technique was rusty. She might make mistakes, but something deep inside her was saying yes. The part of her that had never really stopped being a musician was waking up and demanding to be heard. Will you help me? She asked Robert. Of course. Robert stood up and gently guided Sarah toward the piano. As they walked across the ballroom, a few guests looked up with mild curiosity. They probably thought Robert was showing the waitress something about the piano set up for the auction. When they reached the piano, Sarah's legs felt weak. The instrument looked even more magnificent up close. The black surface reflected her nervous face like a dark mirror. She could see her uniform, her tired eyes, her uncertain expression. She did not look like someone who should be playing at an event like this. I don't think I can do this, she whispered to Robert. Yes, you can, he said firmly. You were born to do this. Sarah sat down on the piano bench. Her hands were trembling as she placed them on the keys. The ballroom around her was full of conversation and laughter. Nobody was paying attention to her yet. She had a few more seconds before people would notice what was happening. She closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. She thought about why she had started playing piano in the first place. It was not for fame or money or applause. It was because music was the most beautiful thing she had ever discovered. It was because playing piano made her feel like she could touch something bigger than herself. Sarah decided to play the same Chopin nocturne she had played for Robert earlier. It was a piece she knew well even after all these years. It was a piece that meant something to her personally, and it was beautiful enough to make people stop and listen. She took a deep breath and played the first note. The sound was pure and clear, cutting through the conversations around her like a silver bell. Sarah played the opening melody slowly and gently, letting each note ring fully before moving to the next one. At the nearest table, a woman stopped talking mid-sentence and looked toward the piano with surprise. Then the man next to her noticed the music and turned to look as well. Slowly, like ripples spreading across a pond, the conversations began to quiet as more people became aware of the unexpected performance. Sarah kept playing, her confidence growing with each measure. Her fingers remembered the piece perfectly. Her hands moved across the keys with increasing grace and certainty. The music flowed from the piano like water, filling every corner of the grand ballroom. The nocturne was the perfect choice. It was sad but hopeful, simple but profound. The melody spoke of longing and loss, but also of beauty that could survive any hardship. It was the sound of someone who had suffered but had not given up, someone who still believed in the power of dreams. As Sarah played, she felt herself transforming. The tired waitress with sore feet and worried thoughts was disappearing. In her place sat a musician, an artist, someone who had something precious to give to the world. The technique came back like muscle memory. Her fingers curved naturally, over the keys. Her wrists stayed relaxed and flexible. Her touch was sensitive and expressive. She could make the piano whisper or sing, laugh or cry, all with the subtle pressure of her fingertips. More and more guests were turning to look at the piano now. Conversations were stopping at table after table as people realized they were hearing something extraordinary. This was not background music or recorded sound. This was live, real human artistry happening right in front of them. Sarah reached the most beautiful part of the nocturne, where the melody soared above a gentle bass line like a bird flying over calm water. She played it with all the emotion she had kept buried for years. All the love for her family, all the grief for her father, all the hope for a better future. The ballroom was becoming quieter and quieter as more people stopped their conversations to listen. Even the waitstaff had paused in their work, drawn by the unexpected beauty filling the air. Sarah had no idea that her life was about to change forever. She only knew that for this moment, she was exactly where she belonged. At a piano, making music, sharing the gift that had been given to her so many years ago. The nocturne continued to unfold, note by note, phrase by phrase, building toward something beautiful and inevitable. The transformation happened slowly, then all at once. As Sarah continued playing the Chopin nocturne, the wealthy guests began to drift toward the piano like people drawn to a warm fire on a cold night. They came one by one at first, then in small groups until nearly everyone in the ballroom had gathered around the beautiful black instrument and the young woman making magic with her fingers. Margaret Whitmore was among the first to approach. She had been in the middle of telling someone about her expensive art collection when the music reached her ears. At first, she was annoyed by the interruption. She was not used to being upstaged by anything or anyone, especially not by a member of the hotel staff. But as the melody continued, something changed in Margaret's expression. The irritation faded from her face, replaced by something softer, something she had not felt in years. The music was reminding her of something from long ago, something she had almost forgotten. She remembered being 16 years old and playing violin in her high school orchestra. She had not been the best player, but she had loved it. She had loved the feeling of being part of something beautiful with other young musicians. She had loved the way the music could make her feel happy or sad or hopeful, all at the same time. Margaret's daughter Emily had wanted to study music too. Emily had been gifted at violin, much more talented than Margaret had ever been. But Margaret had talked her out of it. Music is a hobby, not a career, she had said. You need to study something practical, something that will make you financially secure. Now Emily was a successful lawyer who drove an expensive car and lived in a beautiful house. But when was the last time Margaret had seen her daughter truly happy? When was the last time Emily had smiled the way she used to smile when she played violin? Margaret felt tears forming in her eyes as Sarah played. She tried to wipe them away quickly, hoping no one would notice. People like Margaret Whitmore were not supposed to cry at charity dinners. They were supposed to be composed and dignified at all times. Near the piano, Richard Hayes had stopped bragging about his new yacht to listen to the music. Richard was a hard man who had built his fortune by being tougher and more ruthless than his competitors. He did not usually have time for music or art or anything that did not directly make him money. But something about Sarah's playing was getting through his thick walls. The melody was simple but pure, and it reminded Richard of his childhood home. His mother used to play piano on Sunday afternoons when he was very young. She would play old songs while he and his sister sat on the floor nearby, building with blocks or coloring in books. Richard had forgotten about those Sunday afternoons. He had been so busy building his empire that he had pushed away most of his childhood memories. They seemed too soft, too sentimental for a man who made his living buying and selling buildings. But now, listening to Sarah play, Richard could almost smell his mother's perfume and hear her gentle voice humming along with the piano. He realized that he had not visited his mother's grave in over 2 years. He had been too busy making money to honor the woman who had given him life and love. Steady. Music continued, drawing more people into its spell. Jennifer Walsh, the oil heiress, found herself thinking about her own daughter who was away at boarding school. Jennifer saw her daughter only a few times a year because she was always traveling or attending social events. She paid for the best schools and the finest clothes, but when was the last time they had simply sat together and talked? At the edge of the crowd, a young man named David Morrison was fighting back tears. David had inherited his father's banking fortune when he was 25. He had never had to work for anything in his life. Everything had been handed to him on expensive silver plates, but David had a secret. He wrote poetry. Beautiful, heartfelt poetry that he shared with no one because he was afraid people would think it was silly. Rich men were supposed to think about stocks and real estate, not about metaphors and rhyme schemes. Sarah's music was speaking to the poet inside David. The melody was like a poem made of sound instead of words. It had rhythm and emotion and meaning that went deeper than language. David wondered what would happen if he had the courage to share his poetry the way Sarah was sharing her music. Even the hotel staff had stopped working to listen. Waiters and busboys stood at the edges of the crowd, their trays forgotten in their hands. Some of them had tears in their eyes, too. They recognized something of themselves in Sarah's performance. Here was one of their own, someone who served others and cleaned up messes and smiled politely all day, showing everyone that she was more than just her job. Mr. Thompson, the hotel manager, stood near the kitchen door with a confused expression on his face. He was not sure whether to stop the performance or let it continue. This was not part of the planned program for the evening. But he could see how the guests were responding to the music. They were not complaining or asking for Sarah to stop. They were listening with an intensity he had never seen before at any hotel event. Sarah was completely absorbed in the music now. She had forgotten about the crowd gathering around her. She had forgotten about her sore feet and her worries about money. There was only the piano and the melody flowing through her fingers. She reached the climax of the nocturne, where the music became more passionate and urgent. Her fingers danced across the keys with increasing confidence and skill. The melody soared above the gentle accompaniment like a bird flying toward the sun. In the audience, people were having reactions they had not expected. Some were thinking about their children and wondering if they had made the right choices about careers and life paths. Others were remembering their own abandoned dreams and talents. Still others were simply experiencing pure beauty for the first time in months or years. The music was doing what great art always does. It was showing people truths about themselves and their lives that they usually kept hidden. It was breaking through the careful walls they had built around their hearts. It was reminding them that there was more to life than money and status and expensive possessions. A woman named Patricia Chen, Robert's wife, stood next to her husband with tears streaming down her face. She was thinking about their daughter, Lisa, who had given up piano to become a lawyer. Patricia had supported that decision at the time, but now she wondered if they had stolen something precious from their child. Patricia remembered Lisa's face when she played piano as a teenager, the joy and concentration and pure happiness that music brought her. Lisa was successful now, but she rarely smiled like that anymore. She was always stressed about cases and deadlines and billable hours. Near the back of the crowd, an elderly man named Thomas Wheeler was leaning heavily on his walking cane. Thomas was 83 years old and had more money than he could spend in several lifetimes. But he was thinking about his late wife, Martha, who had loved classical music. Martha had died 5 years ago, and Thomas had not listened to music since her funeral. It hurt too much to hear the songs they used to enjoy together, but Sarah's playing was so beautiful that it made Thomas remember the good times instead of just the sadness. He could almost feel Martha standing next to him, listening to the lovely melody with the gentle smile she always wore when she heard something beautiful. The nocturne was building toward its conclusion now. Sarah's fingers moved with grace and precision across the keys, drawing every possible drop of emotion from the simple but profound melody. The piano responded to her touch like a living thing, producing sounds that ranged from whisper-soft to gloriously full. In the crowd, people who had not thought about beauty or art or human connection in years were being reminded of what really mattered in life. The music was creating a bridge between Sarah's world and their world, showing them that the young woman they had ignored all evening was actually one of the most gifted people in the room. As the piece moved toward its gentle, peaceful ending, Sarah felt a sense of completeness she had not experienced in 10 years. This was who she really was. This was what she was meant to do. For these few precious minutes, she was not a waitress or a poor girl struggling to survive. She was a musician, sharing her gift with people who needed to hear it. Sarah played the final notes of the nocturne with perfect gentleness, letting each sound fade naturally into the silence. Her hands lifted from the keys slowly, reluctant to break the connection with the beautiful instrument. For a moment, the entire ballroom was completely quiet. Even the kitchen staff had stopped moving. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, afraid to break the spell that Sarah's music had cast over the room. Then Margaret Whitmore began to cry. It started as a single tear rolling down her cheek, but soon became something she could not control. Margaret, who prided herself on always being composed and dignified, found herself sobbing in front of a room full of people she needed to impress. She covered her face with her hands, but the tears kept coming. The music had unlocked something inside Margaret that had been locked away for decades. She was not crying just about her daughter Emily and the violin lessons that had been abandoned. She was crying about all the times she had chosen money over meaning, status over substance, appearance over authenticity. Margaret thought about the charity events she attended not because she cared about the causes, but because she wanted to see her name in the society pages of newspapers. She thought about the expensive art she collected, not because it moved her, but because it impressed her wealthy friends. She thought about the empty conversations she had every day with people who never talked about anything real or important. When was the last time Margaret had done something simply because it was beautiful? When was the last time she had listened to music just because she loved it? When was the last time she had cried because she was moved by art instead of frustrated by business deals? Margaret's sobs were quiet, but visible to everyone around her. Instead of being embarrassed by her tears, other people in the crowd began to feel their own emotions rising to the surface. Robert Chen wiped his eyes with his expensive silk handkerchief. He was thinking about his daughter Lisa and all the piano recitals he had missed because of business meetings. He was thinking about the beautiful music that had once filled his house before everyone got too busy for such things. He was thinking about how he had convinced Lisa that practical careers were more important than following your heart. Robert looked at Sarah sitting at the piano in her simple work uniform. This young woman had more real talent in her rough red hands than most people had in their entire bodies. Yet she was working as a waitress because life had forced her to choose survival over art. How many other talented people were out there, cleaning offices and serving food because they could not afford to pursue their gifts? Patricia Chen, Robert's wife, was crying too. She was remembering the day Lisa had packed away her piano music and decided to study law instead. Patricia had thought it was a mature, responsible decision. Now she wondered if they had helped their daughter kill a part of herself that could never be brought back to life. Patricia thought about calling Lisa tonight and asking her if she ever missed playing piano, but she was afraid of the answer. What if Lisa said yes? What if their daughter had spent the last 10 years regretting the choice she had made? What if she was successful but unhappy, just like so many other people in this room? Near the piano, Jennifer Walsh was thinking about her own daughter, who was only 12 years old but already being pressured to think about practical careers instead of following her interests. Jennifer's daughter loved to paint and draw, but Jennifer had been telling her that art was just a hobby, not a real job. Jennifer realized that she was about to make the same mistake with her daughter that so many other parents in this room had made with their children. She was about to teach her daughter that money was more important than passion, that security was more valuable than creativity. The young man named David Morrison was crying openly now. He was thinking about all the poetry he had written and hidden away because he was afraid people would think it was silly or unmanly. He was thinking about all the times he had pretended to be interested in banking and real estate when what he really wanted to do was write and share his words with the world. David looked at Sarah and felt inspired by her courage. If this young woman could sit down at a piano in front of all these important people and share her gift, maybe he could find the courage to share his poetry. Maybe it was not too late to become the person he really wanted to be instead of the person everyone expected him to be. Even some of the toughest, most successful men in the room were struggling with unexpected emotions. Richard Hayes, who had built his fortune by being harder and more ruthless than his competitors, found himself thinking about his mother and those Sunday afternoon piano sessions from his childhood. Richard had not thought about gentleness or beauty or family love in years. He had trained himself to think only about profit margins and competitive advantages, but Sarah's music had reminded him that there had been a time when he was just a little boy who loved to listen to his mother play piano while he colored pictures on the floor. Thomas Wheeler, the elderly millionaire, was leaning heavily on his walking cane and crying for his late wife Martha. The music had brought back so many beautiful memories of the life they had shared together. They had gone to concerts and operas. They had listened to classical music while cooking dinner together. They had danced slowly in their living room to songs that meant something special to them. After Martha died, Thomas had stopped listening to music because it made him too sad. But Sarah's playing had shown him that music could also celebrate the beautiful times, not just mourn their passing. Maybe it was time to start listening to Martha's favorite songs again, not as a way to torture himself with grief, but as a way to honor the love they had shared. Throughout the crowd, people were having similar reactions. They were remembering dreams they had abandoned, relationships they had neglected, and parts of themselves they had buried under piles of money and success and social obligations. The hotel staff members were crying too, but for different reasons. They saw themselves in Sarah's courage and talent. Here was someone who worked the same kinds of jobs they worked, someone who struggled with the same kinds of problems they struggled with, showing everyone that working-class people had gifts and talents and dreams just like anyone else. Maria, another waitress, was thinking about her own abandoned dream of becoming a teacher. She had been accepted to college 15 years ago, but could not afford to go. She had been working in restaurants ever since, telling herself that it was too late to change her life. But watching Sarah play piano was making her wonder if it really was too late. Carlos, a busboy, was thinking about the songs he wrote and sang at home when no one was listening. He had never had the courage to perform in public, but Sarah's bravery was inspiring him to think about trying an open mic night at a local club. Even Mr. Thompson, the hotel manager, was moved by what he was witnessing. He had worked in hotels for 20 years and had seen thousands of events and performances, but he had never seen anything like this. Sarah's music was not just entertainment. It was transformation. It was truth. It was healing. Sarah herself was still sitting at the piano, not quite believing what had just happened. She had expected to play one song and then go back to work. She had not expected to move an entire room full of people to tears. She had not expected to feel so complete and alive and real. Looking out at the crowd of crying, thoughtful faces, Sarah realized that her music had done something important. It had reminded these wealthy, successful people that there were things in life more valuable than money. It had shown them that beauty and art and human connection were not luxuries, but necessities for a meaningful life. The silence continued for another moment as people wiped their eyes and tried to compose themselves. But something fundamental had changed in that ballroom. The invisible barriers between the staff and the guests had crumbled. The pretense and showiness of the evening had been replaced by something real and honest and deeply human. Sarah's performance had not just been a display of musical talent. It had been a reminder of who they all really were underneath their expensive clothes and carefully constructed social masks. It had been a call to remember what truly mattered in life. The silence finally broke when someone started clapping. It was not the polite, expected applause that usually followed entertainment at charity events. This was different, deeper, more meaningful. The clapping started slowly, then grew stronger, as more people joined in, until the entire ballroom was filled with the sound of genuine appreciation. But even more surprising than the applause was what happened next. Margaret Whitmore, still wiping tears from her eyes, walked straight to the piano where Sarah sat in stunned silence. "My dear," Margaret said, her voice shaking with emotion, "that was the most beautiful thing I have heard in years. What is your name?" "Sarah," she answered quietly, still not quite believing this was happening. "Sarah Martinez. Sarah, I need to know about your musical background. Where did you study? Who was your teacher?" Sarah looked around nervously. All these important people were staring at her, waiting for her answer. She was still wearing her black waitress uniform. Her hands were still red and rough from working. She felt completely out of place. "I studied piano when I was young," Sarah said. "I had a scholarship to music school, but I had to drop out when my father died. I needed to work to help my family." Margaret nodded, understanding immediately. "How long has it been since you played?" "Seriously? About 10 years, Sarah admitted. 10 years, Margaret repeated, shaking her head in amazement. "And you can still play like that after 10 years? She turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just witnessed something extraordinary. This young woman has a gift that should not be wasted." Robert Chen stepped forward. "Sarah, I told you earlier that sometimes the most important moments come when we least expect them. This is one of those moments." Other people began approaching the piano, all wanting to talk to Sarah. For the first time all evening, she was not invisible. These wealthy guests were seeing her as a real person with real talent, not just someone who brought them food and cleaned their tables. David Morrison, the young poet, was one of the first to speak up. "Sarah, your performance has inspired me more than you know. I write poetry, but I've been too afraid to share it with anyone. If you can have the courage to play for all of us, maybe I can find the courage to share my writing." Jennifer Walsh approached with tears still fresh on her cheeks. "My daughter loves art, but I've been telling her it's not practical. After hearing you play, I realize I've been wrong. Some things are more important than practical." Patricia Chen, Robert's wife, stepped forward with determination in her voice. "Sarah, I want to help you get back to music. My husband and I have resources, and we believe in supporting real talent when we find it." The offers of help began coming from all directions. Thomas Wheeler, the elderly millionaire, offered to pay for private piano lessons with the best teachers in the city. "My late wife would have loved your playing," he said. "It would honor her memory to help you continue your musical journey." Margaret Whitmore was already making plans. "I know the director of the conservatory downtown. I can arrange for you to audition for their program. And if money is an issue, I will personally ensure that your education is funded." Dr. Amanda Foster, a successful surgeon who had been quiet all evening, stepped forward. "I own a small concert hall downtown. It's nothing fancy, but it has good acoustics and a beautiful piano. I would love to host a recital for you once you're ready." Sarah looked around in amazement. An hour ago, these people had barely noticed. She existed. Now they were offering to change her life completely. It felt like a dream. But the tears on their faces and the sincerity in their voices told her it was real. "I don't know what to say," Sarah whispered. "This is more than I ever imagined possible." Robert smiled warmly. "Say yes. Say yes to the opportunities. Say yes to your talent. Say yes to the life you were meant to live." But Sarah was thinking about her family, her sick mother who needed expensive medicine, her brother Miguel, who was working so hard to become a doctor. "I still need to work," she said. "My family depends on me. I can't just abandon my responsibilities." Margaret exchanged glances with several other guests. "What if we could arrange things so you could pursue music and still support your family? What if we could create a scholarship that covers not just your education, but also provides enough money for your family's needs?" Sarah's eyes widened. "You would do that?" "We would do that," Margaret said firmly. "But more than that, we want to do that. Your performance tonight has reminded all of us what really matters in life. Helping you pursue your gift is a way for us to invest in something meaningful." Mr. Thompson, the hotel manager, had been watching all of this with growing amazement. He stepped forward hesitantly. "Sarah, I want you to know that your job here will always be available if you need it. But I also want you to know that what you did tonight was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen at this hotel." The transformation in the room was complete. The charity dinner had become something entirely different. Instead of wealthy people writing checks to feel good about themselves, they were directly connecting with someone whose life they could actually change. Richard Hayes, the tough businessman, pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my assistant right now. I want to set up a meeting with you this week to discuss long-term financial support. What you have is too precious to lose to economic necessity." Patricia Chen was already thinking ahead. "We need to get you a piano to practice on at home. I know a music store downtown that has excellent instruments. And you'll need proper performance clothes," added Jennifer Walsh. "I know the best shops in the city." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the generosity and support. But more than that, she felt seen and valued for who she really was for the first time in years. These people were not just offering her money. They were offering her a chance to become herself again. "There's one condition," said Margaret with a gentle smile. "You have to promise us that you'll never give up on your music again. Promise us that you'll remember this feeling and this moment whenever life gets difficult." "I promise," Sarah said, tears flowing down her face. "I promise I'll never give up again." Robert nodded approvingly. "And we promise to support you not just tonight, but for as long as it takes for you to achieve your dreams." The evening continued, but it was completely different from what anyone had expected. Instead of the usual networking and social posturing, people had real conversations about art and meaning and purpose. They talked about their own abandoned dreams and their children's futures. They talked about what they wanted their legacy to be. Sarah found herself at the center of it all, no longer invisible but celebrated. She played 2 more pieces that evening, a gentle Mozart sonata and a passionate Rachmaninoff prelude. Each performance was met with the same emotional response from the audience. When the evening finally ended, Sarah had more than just job offers and financial support. She had a community of people who believed in her and wanted to see her succeed. She had mentors and friends and opportunities she had never dreamed possible. But most importantly, she had herself back. The musician she had always been had been hiding inside the Waitress, waiting for the right moment to emerge. That moment had come when Robert Chen asked her to trust that sometimes the most important moments come when we least expect them. Sarah packed up her things that night. She thought about her father. She thought about the old piano he had saved money to buy her. She thought about his belief in her talent and his dreams for her future. She knew he would be proud of what had happened tonight. Sarah Martinez walked out of the Grand Meridian Hotel that evening as a different person than she had been when she walked in. She was still a daughter who would support her sick mother. She was still a sister who would help her brother through college. But she was also a musician again. She was an artist with a future full of possibilities. The Waitress who had been invisible for so long had become visible in the most beautiful way possible. And in doing so, she had helped a room full of wealthy, successful people remember what it meant to be truly human. Sometimes the most powerful transformations happen, not when we try to change ourselves, but when we have the courage to show others who we really are.